The other thing you have to watch out for is basically the narrative fallacy, the way people use, they basically project motivation onto people and tell you that this explains everything. It explains why people are behaving the way they are. It says that bad actions always stain the ideas of the person committing the action, which isn't true. You also have to watch out about your own reactions to things, that just because somebody says up doesn't mean the answer is down. You have to sometimes have a little nuance. I've been watching parts of the trial of Derek Chauvin, the guy who knelt on the neck of George Floyd. And it's been very interesting because I have a theory of the case, and that's all it is a theory. I've watched the videos like everybody else, and I'm not going to say that this is how the case should be decided or anything, but it is we all have our theories of what happened since we've all seen the video. And my theory of the case is that Floyd, who was a huge man, I mean, he was a really, really big guy, obviously, it seems to me, did resist arrest, was under the influence of fentanyl, was under the influence of drugs. He resisted arrest. The police used due force to bring him down. But I think at some point, Chauvin got into an entrenched mentality because people were shouting at him to let the guy go, and he was thinking, nobody's going to tell me how to do his job. You almost see it in his eyes that he's thinking, like, I'm surrounded by a irrational mob, and I've got to handle this guy who is a danger to himself and others. And so he went on kneeling on him, and the ME, the medical examiner, says that he wasn't strangled to death, that he died of a fentanyl overdose and basically a heart problem that he had. But still, it's an ugly, ugly thing to see. And some of the testimony has been really upsetting. I mean, these are some of them ordinary people who were just watching things unfold. They didn't like what they were seeing. The guy was crying that I can't breathe and crying for his mama even before the police action started. So this was something that was going on. But they had people like, there was this woman, Genevieve Hansen, who was a fire department EMT who was off duty. And she came by and started to talk to the police saying, this is not looking good. You ought to let me take a look at him. And they wouldn't let her in. She wasn't wearing her uniform, and they wouldn't let her in, and they basically chased her away. And she became one of the people shouting in the crowd. And so you can really see how she's obviously a person of substance, a trained woman with, who knew what she was looking at and was afraid for this guy's life. But you could see how, to the police mentality, this woman became part of the crowd. Here she is giving a little bit of her testimony, cut 3.
How were you doing that, trying to get the officers to focus on you and get help?
I think in my memory, I tried different tactics of calm and reasoning. I tried to be assertive. I pled and was desperate.
Did you also at some point start raising your voice?
Yes, sir.
And maybe used some foul language even?
Yes, sir.
Why?
Because I was desperate to help, and I wasn't getting what I needed to do and gaining access.
And at some point, the voices of the other people around you, did you feel that sort of interfered with getting the officer's attention?
Yes.
You can see, I mean, here's a woman, you hope would come and help you if you were in trouble. As I say, a trained EMT. And you can see how from the police, she says she's shouting curses at the people. You can see how from the police point of view, they just don't want to be interfered with. They've got a situation on their hands and they got to deal with it. It looks to me like at some point this guy should have stopped kneeling on Floyd's neck, and that looks bad. But the one thing I haven't heard any proof of, any evidence about, is that he was a racist, that he was acting in any way in a racist way. This guy, again, he was over 200 pounds. You look at his arms, he was a muscle man, Floyd. He was like a big guy. I haven't heard one piece of evidence that this was a question of race. And of course, that is what we've been told. That is what this whole panic, this has been causing endless riots that Black Lives Matter has been using and using and using, and the Democrats have been using and using and using to gin up race hatred among us, among our fellow Americans. But then you get things like this. Here's a clip from Al Sharpton telling us what this trial means, even though there's no evidence of racism whatsoever.
Chauvin is in the courtroom, but America's on trial. America's on trial to see if we have gotten to the place where we can hold police accountable if they break the law. The law is for everybody. Policemen are not above the law. Policemen are subject to the law. And that's what's going on in this courtroom. And that's why we're here.
But it's not. It's not what's going on in the courtroom at all. It's the attribution of a motive. It's an attribution of a narrative to something that doesn't seem to have been that at all. Now, maybe evidence will come out that says it was more racial than it seems, but it's incredible that this narrative, but remember, this narrative is everywhere. The government supports it, the media supports it, the corporations support it, all the power supports it. So you can bet it is in service to power. Chelsea Handler, one of our wonderful celebrities, she tweets out, it's so pathetic that there's a trial to prove that Derek Chauvin killed George Floyd when there's video of him doing so. We don't need no trial. I don't need no stinking trial. This is the way they're talking. And the use of murder, the use of grief to do this is particularly reprehensible. I've talked about this before. I know there was a shooting in, where was it? In Colorado, I believe. And there was a shooting there and they started in about white supremacy, white supremacy, white supremacy. Turns out the guy was of Syrian descent, was an anti-Trump left-winger, and suddenly the case just vanished, just disappeared. It just disappeared. If it's not going to serve their point of view, if it's not going to serve the point of view of the power, right? The media, the corporations, the government, if it's not going to serve their point of view, it simply ceases to exist. So you're in this cloud of lies. But the thing about motivation is it's important to connect motivation with ideas. You know, recently people were very upset by a story about Ravi Zacharias, a Christian teacher who recently died. And he was a guy who inspired a lot of people. And it turns out that he was misusing funds to pay for massage therapists, the usual sexual stuff, really unpleasant stuff. And people are really hurt by this. But the thing about Zacharias is when Zacharias did this, he actually was violating the things that he was talking about. He was violating the things he preached. He was being, we should say, a hypocrite, or at least a failure to fulfill those ideas. So the ideas aren't tainted by him. He is tainted by not living up to those ideas. That's very different than talking about Michel Foucault. Now, I was talking about Michel Foucault last week, I think it was, and talking about his commitment to the Marquis de Sade. We got a good letter today in the mailbag about the Marquis de Sade. I'll get to that. But we were talking about that, about his commitment to the Marquis de Sade. And he has now been accused of having raped little Arab children. There's a fellow French intellectual who says they were 8, 9, 10 years old. He was throwing money at them, and he would say, let's meet at 10 p.m. at the usual place, and he would make love to them on gravestones. Guy named Guy Sormand. And he says he regrets not reporting it. And I tweeted about this, and I said it's kind of strange that Foucault, who believed in the Marquis de Sade, would end up abusing people. And somebody said, well, that's unfair. This is unsubstantiated. We don't know if this is true. And fair enough. But Foucault openly declared that sex between adults and children should be decriminalized. He openly declared, some feminists have real trouble with Foucault because he openly declared that rapists should not be punished by the law because it established rape as their identity, when in the old days, in the medieval days, for instance, nobody was ever accused of rape because it was considered just a thing that you did. It wasn't considered a big deal. Now it's considered all traumatizing. What's that about, right? So Foucault, if indeed he did those things, and if indeed he didn't do those things, still exemplified. Those were his ideas. His ideas were that it was okay, that the abuse of people for sexual pleasure was okay, that being abused for sexual pleasure was okay, that abusing children, that using children for your own sexual pleasure was okay. So the thing is, it is not necessarily just your actions or just your ideas, but the context in which you act in keeping with your ideas. So a Christian who abuses people is acting against his Christianity, whereas a Foucaultian, this Sadian who abuses people, is acting right in keeping with his ideas and shows you where those ideas lead. This is the reprehensible use of murder to basically denigrate all the things that the power doesn't like, namely freedom, namely constitutionalism, namely states' rights and local rights, all those things that the power wants to get its hands on and squeeze. If you commit a murder that can be used to attack those things, they will use it. If you attack a murder in favor of those things, you'll just be vanished.